I bet you guys didn't know we do music. Yes, that's right. At sambatree.com, we have a whole music section. If you're part of our email list, well, I hope you're getting the emails because we're actually giving away music, and we try to do this at least once a month. I was planted in the open, white sky over me, roots in ordinary ground. Just give you a moment here. I could see, but every time the sunlight fell, I'd lift my eyes. The name of this one is called Raindrops, Waterfalls and Raindrops. So far away, they shimmered in the distance like they never knew a drought. Water rushing at their feet while I was counting drops. And every year I stretched myself, just trying to belong, wondering why my growing always felt so slow, so wrong. I said, Lord, am I broken? Am I standing in the wrong place? Why does my reaching feel heavy when there's looks like grace? Oh, waterfalls and raindrops, they don't sound the same. One comes loud and shining, one whispered your name. I thought I needed rivers pouring down on me, but almost sometimes the strongest tree needs just the raindrops to be. All right, yeah, that's our latest album that we just released. It's called Waterfalls and Raindrops. You can get that again if you're on the email list on sambatree.com. You actually get free access to it. And not only that, I even went a step further because I know that when it comes to sales emails, most of us, we probably don't even open them up. So don't worry, make sure on our YouTube page, right here at Sambatree YouTube page, go to the community post page. I got a link to the email there, so make sure you check that out, okay? And we're also running a sale. We'll be closing it out this weekend, and that's on some capsules, and we'll probably be doing some other fun things this weekend too. So make sure you are clicked in, tuned in to sambatree.com. We're not just sending out emails and just saying, hey, buy this. We actually, man, we're really trying to make a difference when it comes to health and wellness. And we do take it very seriously, but at the same time, we can have fun too. And health and wellness isn't just something in a bottle. It's also part of who you are. I mean, when you're going outside, sound, music, rhythm, all of that is part of health and wellness. And that's what we try to do here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about this, defining a weed. And I'm not just talking about, okay, or depending on who you are, we're not just talking about that. But actually what we're going to do is go into the history of weeds. Yeah, like anything else, there's a history behind, in this case, what we're going to be talking about, weeds. And when I say weeds, I'm talking about how we defined it as, right, in this today's world that we're in. Now, for you and I, when we hear the word weed, we oftentimes think of that plant that grows in our yard that we didn't ask to grow there. And so our mindset is automatically programmed, hey, you need to get out of here, or you just pull it up, or you just do something with it because in your mind, it doesn't belong there. Well, I'm here to tell you when we're going to take a quick trip back in history a little bit. I'm going to be doing some reading here, and I'm going to read you some things here to kind of give you an overview of where did that mindset actually come from. And also, it does transfer to how we see people. All right. So very interesting. This is something just came to my mind, and I figured I'd do a little digging on it. So let me go ahead and get into it. And I think you're going to find this really interesting. Okay. All right, so let's go. So before weeds, most of human history, plants were not morally ranked. Now, as I'm reading too, there'll be times I'll take a break and, elaborate on some things. They were not morally ranked. Hunter-gatherers and early farmers categorized plants as edible, medicinal, poisonous, or useful for tools, fiber, rituals, or animals. All right. Wild plants growing among crops were often resources, not enemies. Very interesting. They were seen as a resource. Many so-called modern weeds, dandelions, plantain, lamb's quarters, were intentionally gathered. There were no universal concept of a plant that simply should not exist. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You hear that again? Let me read that part again. There was no universal concept that a plant should not exist. Now, well, let's think about that, because today's world, we got a whole industry dedicated to that purpose, telling certain plants you should not exist. Let's dig a little deeper, okay? Early agriculture, and this is like Mesopotamia, Egypt, in China, India, and all of that, right? The first functional idea of weeds appear here, but it's still context-based, not moral. And again, they always leave Africa out, but guess who ain't going to do it? I'm not. But again, I'm just want to point that out, how they just always leave Africa out of everything. Anything in certain parts of Africa outside of Egypt, it's always categorized as prehistoric. Anyway. All right, so plants were a problem only if they reduced yields, competed for water in irrigated systems, or interfered with harvesting. Well, that makes kind of sense, doesn't it? If it's going to, if these plants that are growing, we're going to call them uninvited plants. And when I say uninvited, I'm not saying the land didn't invite them. I'm saying that the people didn't invite them. And as long as it's not disrupting the ones that were invited, right? They were welcome. They didn't see it like, okay, we got to get rid of this stuff, right? For the most part. And so I know for some of you reading the Bible, it talks about the wheat and tares growing together, right? The wheat and the tare, you let them grow together. And then there's other instances where you do, when they're going through the crops or whatever, you take the brush out and then you throw that in a fire. Only reason why farmers do that, again, is because, again, it is competing for resources. These plants, these uninvited plants, are actually competing for resources. And so the farmer's like, okay, you getting a bit too much. It's okay for you to be here, but, just know you're not going to overtake what I'm trying to grow here. All right, let's go. Even then, many field weeds were tolerated. Some were rotated, grazed, or harvested later. The mindset was management, not eradication. And here's a classical medieval periods. And again, in the Greek, Roman, Islamic world and in Europe, this is where the language, we begin to see it shift. Greek and Roman writers start describing plants as noxious, useless, and burdensome. So that is where we're starting to get that in Greek and Roman culture. All right. And again, your friend here, your brother here, I'm not going to leave Africa out of this, right? Because again, let's be clear. The uninvited plants, that is a concept that has come from Greek and Roman culture. It didn't come when you start going into Africa and, some of those other indigenous, areas where brown people lived and, they don't even talk about. They never looked at plants like that. Okay, that came from Greek and Roman culture. Okay, let's go on. This was still philosophical and agricultural, not extermination focused. Medieval Europe actually reabsorbed many of the wild plants into medicine. So you did have some enclaves within European culture, like the monastic, where the what you call it, the monks, the monks and Catholic, areas and all of that. They would have, they were known for being gardeners and stuff. So the monastic herb gardens, folk knowledge, indigenous plant wisdom, often held by women. All right, let's go. Which later became weeds, often standard remedies. So these little enclaves, they said, well, there's a use for all of this stuff. All right. Anyway, let's see here. Now here's the real turning point. All right. And let's go. They said three forces collide. Number one, enclosure and private property. Okay. So this is, I want you to think in 3D here. Okay, because remember, I said this also can apply to people. But anyway, enclosure and private property. Land becomes fenced, owned, and measured. Okay. Anything not deliberately planted becomes out of place. Wow. And there it is. That's what exactly what I was saying. So you buy a piece of land, right? And in most places today, that land is fenced in for the most part, right? And especially within European culture, it was kind of like that. They would have walls or, sheep's gates, or not gates, but, fencing and all of that stuff around there. They would have, pieces of wood and all of that. And they said, this is my land. Now, when you look at the continent of Africa and when you start going out a bit, they didn't have borders like that. Borders, when you're looking at indigenous cultures, ancient cultures, the borders were kind of like very fluid. They were very fluid. It were understood. There wasn't any hard kind of like, okay, the Zulus versus another group, you couldn't cross this line or whatever. It wasn't really like that. All throughout, when you're reading about ancient African culture, it wasn't like that when it came to borders. It was kind of like a very fluid kind of situation. All right. So they didn't, so those cultures didn't really think in those very, rigid ways when it came to land ownership. Okay, so anyway, let's move on. Anything not deliberately planted becomes out of place. So wait a minute, I didn't plant this. I didn't plant this tree here. I didn't plant these weeds. All right, then you need to get up out of here. So that's when we start seeing how plants were being treated. Certain plants were being treated as automatic. You're an invader. You don't belong here. See where this is going? Anyway, let's move on. Colonial botany. European powers encounter unfamiliar ecosystems. Indigenous plants were labeled invasive, savage, and chaotic. And you notice again how this applies to how many indigenous people were described. Anyway, let's move on. Protestant and Enlightenment thinking. Nature must be ordered. Everything's got to be ordered. Everything's got to be structured. Everything. That's exactly how it is supposed to be. I'm driving through our community, nice community. And, I mean, when I tell you well manicured, everything. I mean, even the walkways, the sidewalks, all the bushes, you can tell are placed in very strategic places. Every tree, every bush, every plant, every flower, very strategic places. And, here in Arizona, it's very difficult to grow grass out here, as you can imagine, because it's a desert. So what people do is they will cover their front yard or their backyard or even both with rocks, little gravel, like gravel, right? And so what's amazing is that even with that, you still have weeds that will push through. I mean, it can be dry as I don't know what out here. And somehow these plants will find something. All they need is that water, and all they need is, they got plenty of sunlight. And next thing you know, you see them pushing through these rocks, and that's it. And the HOA, they don't play out here. They don't play out here. They're like, wait a minute, you need to pull those up immediately. And I'm sitting up here, I mean, I get it or whatever. And they're like, well, it's because it's unsightly. But if you live in a community that's like that, I would challenge you. Get your phone. I got my phone right here. But get your phone, and you got, now, like I know with the iPhone, and I'm sure with Android as well, you could take a picture of these weeds, and it will actually tell you what they're good for. You'll be amazed at what you'll find. Many of these are medicinal. You'll be very amazed. And that's what I found on some of these. I was like, oh, I can actually make a tea off of this? I didn't know. Oh, it's good for headaches? I didn't know that. Well, that's true. But the HOA said, we got to have structure. We got to have order and all of that. I get it. But at the same time, you see how we've been programmed to see these plants as invading forces and that must be eradicated because we have to have absolute order. Anyway, let's move on. Nature must be ordered. Wilderness becomes suspicious. Improvement of land becomes a moral duty. All right, move on. This is when weed starts meaning a plant that ought to be destroyed, not managed. All right. So again, we could thank our European people on that one. All right. And so here we go. Number two, industrial agriculture. And this is now we're looking in between the 1800s and 1900s. Monoculture farming demands uniformity. Now, when you look at corn, for example, I want you to do this. I'm not going to even pull this up on the screen, but I want you to do it. I've actually showed you guys this. It was a while back on something. I think it was a video I did or whatever. You have to go back. But anyway, my challenge to you is to look up original organic corn. I just want you to look that up. Just corn that's just wild corn. I don't know exactly what you'll look up. And I'm going to tell you, you will be quite shocked. Because the corn that we get today, the full ear corn, and it's just all, golden yellow or like a yellowish orange kind of thing and all that, or white or black, depending on where well, it'll probably be black if it's dried out. But anyway, because you shouldn't be eating black corn. Anyway, so, yes. So corn in its original state, it actually grows like in the forest, and it's only like a few ears of it, right? They all grow like in their small groups, and the ear of corn is quite small. It's not that many kernels on it. It's quite small, and it has a lot of It's very nutritious, as you can imagine. Now, when you are driving, I grew up in New Jersey, so I mean, it was a lot of agricultural. It's an heavy agricultural state. I remember growing up and driving past and even us playing in cornfields, and the uniformity that you see with all those corn stalks. Well, corn doesn't naturally grow that way. It doesn't grow that way at all. And that's why they have to rotate their fields, when they are growing produce like that, when you got all of the same thing growing in one spot, when you're dealing with produce like that, you have to rotate it periodically because it's taking up so much nutrients and minerals and stuff from the soil. Well, if it was growing in its natural state, you wouldn't have to do that because you got other plants there to kind of off balance stuff, and insects and all of that other stuff. They're there to not off balance, but to bring balance. That's what I meant to say. And that's how it's supposed to be, and so when you go back and you look at a lot of these ancient or, these very indigenous, remote cultures, when they're gathering like their fruit and vegetables and herbs and stuff like that, you'll always notice it's growing around other things. But it's a European concept where everything's got to grow all in the same place. Now, some things naturally grow like that, like rice or, there's some other, fruits and vegetables and grains that you can find like that. But for the most part, there's a balance. Nature, one thing about nature is always about balance, so it's not just a woo-woo thing. We see it in nature. Anyway, let's move on here. By the mid 20th century, a weed is officially defined as a plant out of place. It means, and basically they defined it as it's useless, it's harmful, and it's basically useful. I'm sorry, rewind. What I'm trying to say is they said it's a weed, right? So they defined it as a weed. So what they were saying was planting in the minds of people. They're saying, no, we're not saying it's not useful. We're not saying it's not harmful. What we're saying is it's out of place. That's what they were saying. So that's when they started putting that in the minds of people, that weeds are plants that are out of place and then they need to be eradicated. All right. So in the 20th century, especially, we started seeing the lawn aesthetic thing happening. And, as I started getting more and more into understanding nature and really just having a deeper appreciation for it, I began to look at lawns. And I was wondering, well, what's the whole point of a lawn? Out here, we're in Arizona, so the lawn is going to be nothing but rocks for the most part. But, I grew up in New Jersey and on the East Coast, and, it was, everybody had this big patch of grass on the front yard, and it's all the grass is uniformly cut, and it's just straight and it's green and properly edged, and that's it. There's like nothing else there. And I was like, wouldn't it be a genius idea if people were allowed to actually grow, some crops on their lawn? I mean, wouldn't that be a good idea to kind of solve some of the food stuff that we got, shortages that we have going on right now? You see how we're programmed like that? We're programmed not to do that. In fact, they will write laws and tell you that you're not allowed to do that. And the way this system is designed is, no, the only place you should get your produce is from the grocery store. You are not permitted to grow it on your front lawn, because if you do, well, it's clashing with the aesthetic look that we're trying to get into this in this space here. Now, out here, incidentally, in Arizona, you have so many people out here that actually grow their own produce. Like, as you know, we grow, we sell citrus here. Well, Arizona is known as a citrus state, which is something I didn't know a couple of years ago, but it is. And I've been in some communities in the front yard. It's full of orange trees. This is just in the front yard. And in the backyard is a whole nother situation. Even more fruit trees and stuff. And that's how it's supposed to be. But what I'm doing is I'm exposing to you just how we've been programmed, to see nature as an enemy. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, let's move on here. I'm almost finished here. So anyway, plants labeled as weeds are often resilient, very resilient. You pull up a dandelion, guess what? There's going to be 5 more that's going to come up. Medicinal, soil repairing, and pioneer species. They thrive in disturbed land, which is exactly what industrial society creates. So, like, for example, again, the dandelion is not just there just to be there. It's there because it's trying to tell us something. Oftentimes it's telling us, the balance is off in your soil. You need to pay close attention to this. That's typically when you see dandelions, that's what they're trying to do. One of the things they're trying to communicate to us is the condition of the soil, and that the condition of the soil is not ideal. It's not ideal for other plants to grow. And so what do? We go down the street, we go to Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever hardware store, or Walmart, and we get poison to kill the notification from nature trying to tell us something. But meanwhile, we'll pick up our phone and be on the notifications all day. Anyway, so I figure I'd just throw that in. But you see how this works? You see how we've been programmed against nature? Anyway, people started classifying plants as weeds in a strict extermination-focused way between the 1500s and 1800s, with full ideological force arriving during the industrial, agricultural, and modern landscape. And before that, plants were teachers, tools, food, and signals, not enemies. All right. And let me see if I have something else here. And so, so I may do a future one where, plants, in Africa, and how and I'll just maybe highlight some of the things here. How these various African cultures, how they viewed, plants. They would view plants as messengers. They will pay attention to growth patterns, because those growth patterns, they will sit back and look at, there's a meaning to this. Certain plants appearing after trauma. So fire, flood, or overuse. So if there was a great fire that kind of wiped out something, the land, it would react to that trauma. That's trauma to the land. And so the land is going to react to that. It's kind of like our bodies. When our bodies are experiencing stress, what happens? For some people, you start breaking out in something. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, you're getting these little bumps all over the place, right? Well, our bodies nature is no different. When there's trauma that takes place in nature, well, nature's going to respond and react to that. And that's its way of trying to hit the reset button so that it can get back to what it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? So it's quite interesting there. Let's see what else I got here. So anyway, so I'll just wrap it up with this here, and this is that, particularly for us as Black Americans, we have a very long history with this. When you go back, there's a young lady on TikTok. I'm sure she's still on there, but she had a whole platform dedicated to basically going in and schooling people on all these different, herbs and plants and things like that, and how they can be used for a variety of things. And I remember she did a series where she actually talked about how, when Black people that were brought over by slaves, during the transatlantic slave trade, they brought with them an abundance of skill of learning how to live off the land and to create, their own medicines. And many of you know this already, because the slave masters, the ones that would get sick, well, sometimes the doctor may be too far away or whatever. So it was a lot easier for them to depend on Jenny, to come up with some medicine. Well, you just make sure you have the right Jenny, because Jenny will add some other medicine in there. You know what I mean? And that could be a whole host of things. And she would give it to the slave master, but we were known for this. Black people we would forage a lot. We were very deep into foraging, going into forests, going into open fields and picking up whatever herbs and plants that we can find. And we would create all kinds of stuff. This is in your history. You want to talk about Black history? This is part of your history, foraging. Well, the people didn't like this, the powers that shouldn't be, they didn't like that. So they created laws against foraging, and of course that indirectly impacted Black folks who were really into that. So in conclusion, I just wanted to do this video because I want you to see how this system has reprogrammed us into seeing nature as our enemy when it comes to something like weeds. So the next time when you are driving in your car and you just happen to be at a stop sign or a stoplight and you look down and you see some weeds fighting its way through that concrete, it's because that plant is trying to tell you something. It's trying to say, hey, look, I'm here. I got some medicine for you. I know you come here every day. I got the right medicine for you, sir. You know what I mean? So at that same corner, you may have somebody selling water, but right underneath them, they got a whole bunch of medicine that's growing through those cracks. And so now my advice to you, of course, is, we had our foraging. We had a foraging classes that we hosted a few years ago. I would not forage something that's growing in the middle of the street, okay, or in a public sidewalk. I wouldn't do that, because you got a whole host of things like exhaust or, people spitting and all that other stuff, right? So you don't forage there. If you're going to do foraging, you always want to go kind of deeper in the forest where there's not a whole lot of foot traffic or none at all. Those are the best places to do your foraging if that's something that's of interest to you. But again, weeds are not our enemies. They're not. It's just nature's way of trying to communicate to us. So I hope you got something out of this video. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Share this video, and I hope it made you think. All right, you guys take care, and I'll see you again soon. Make sure you check us out again on SambaTree.com. Take care now. Bye-bye.